Picture a windswept homestead on the edge of the Montana frontier, where the winter of 1874 bites deeper than a wolf's fangs, and the horizon stretches like a widow's sigh. The air is sharp as a blade, the sky a bruised gray, heavy with snow that refuses to fall like a promise held back too long. The ranch creaks under the weight of frost, its silence broken only by the mournful groan of the barn's timbers and the restless pawing of horses in their stalls, their breath steaming like ghosts in the cold. No birds sing, no warmth dares linger. This is a land where hope feels like a trespasser, and grief is the only steady companion. Clara Hensley rises before dawn, as she has every morning since her mother's death 10 years ago, her boots laced tight before the rooster can muster its feeble crow. At 28, she's a woman carved from necessity, her hands calloused from hauling hay. Her auburn hair tied back in a braid that's more practical than pretty. Her hazel eyes sharp with a quiet strength no one bothers to notice. She crosses the kitchen in the flicker of a lantern's glow, her breath fogging in the frigid air. The shelves are bare, but for a tin of coffee and a sack of shriveled potatoes. The stove sits cold, its ashes long dead, and a chipped mug holds the faint scent of last night's chamomile tea. She moves like a shadow, careful not to wake her father. Amos Hensley. He hasn't spoken to her in days, not out of spite, but because his sorrow has grown too heavy to share. Since a fire last spring devoured half their eastern fence and the last of their savings, Amos has become a specter in his own home. His once warm voice has withered into grunts, his commands delivered with a curt nod or a furrowed brow. In the silence between them, Clara has grown into a woman unseen, her dreams buried beneath the weight of duty. She pulls on her father's old wool coat, the sleeves too long and smelling of tobacco, and steps into the biting dawn. The snow crunches under her boots, deep enough to sting her shins through her wool stockings. She hauls a bale of hay to the barn, her shoulders squared against a wind that cuts like a lash. When she pries open the barn door, the hinges groaning like a mourner's cry, the horses lift their heads, 2 old mares and a gelding, their nostrils steaming in the half-light. But something else moves in the shadows, a shape that doesn't belong. At first, she thinks it's a sack of oats left too close to the wall. Then it shifts. A man lies curled near the back stall, half buried in straw and a tattered saddle blanket. His wide-brimmed hat is tipped over his face, his duster coat patched and worn through 2 winters, its hem crusted with ice. One hand clutches a burlap satchel to his chest. The other hangs limp, fingertips blue as a frozen creek. Clara freezes, her heart thudding against her ribs. She hasn't seen a stranger on this land since the Army Scouts passed through 2 summers ago. Whoever this man is, he looks like something the storm spat out, a relic of a life the wind forgot. She doesn't scream. Clara's not the screaming kind. Instead, she steps back, her breath shallow, and raises the lantern higher, its golden light spilling over him. His boots are so worn, the soles flap like broken wings. His cheekbones jut sharp beneath a beard matted with frost and weeks of neglect. He's no threat, not now. He looks half dead, a man the cold has already claimed. But the horses aren't spooked, their ears flicking lazily, and that tells her something. She kneels beside him, the hay pricking her knees through her skirt, and presses 2 fingers to his throat. His pulse is faint, a whisper beneath his icy skin, but it's there. She thinks of waking her father, But this man, this mystery, feels like hers to unravel like the first secret she's ever been trusted to keep. She sets the lantern down, its flame dancing in the draft, and reaches for the satchel. Not to steal, just to understand. A folded letter peeks from the side, its edges torn, stained with melted snow. Her fingers, already numb from the cold, tremble as she unfolds it. To my intended bride, it begins, and her breath catches like a snagged thread. She reads on, her lips parting in the stillness. The letter is written in a steady, deliberate hand. The ink smudged but legible. His name is Elias Boone. 27, a carpenter from Ohio. He'd answered a mail-order bride ad, sent his savings, waited for a reply. When none came, he set out west with nothing but the promise in his heart. "I'm not a man of pretty words," he wrote, "but I've got strong hands, a steady temper, and I don't scare easy. I'll come if you'll have me." No return address, no answer. Just a hope that carried him across a frozen wilderness, only to leave him here, broken in her barn. Clara folds the letter as if it might shatter, her chest tight with a feeling she can't name. She looks at him again, Elias, now more than a stranger, a story wrapped in frost and despair. She pulls a horse blanket from the tack room, its edges frayed but warm, and drapes it over him, tucking it around his shoulders. His hand is still cold, but a faint pink creeps into his fingers. She can't leave him like this, not with the cold sinking deeper into his bones. She fetches a tin cup of water, warms it over the lantern's flame until it steams, and kneels again, trickling it onto his cracked lips. He stirs, his breath hitching, a low mumble escaping him words she can't catch, but that don't sound like fear. "You're safe here," she whispers, the words slipping out like a prayer she didn't know she held. The sky outside lightens, a pale gray seeping through the barn's slats. She has only moments before her father comes to check the stock, his morning ritual as predictable as the sunrise. He'll see Elias and ask no questions. He'll fetch the sheriff or worse, take matters into his own hands. She touches Elias's shoulder, her voice urgent. "You need to wake up." He blinks slowly, his eyes a storm gray under lashes dusted with frost. His voice is a rasp, raw as the wind. "Didn't mean to trespass. Ma'am, your barn's warmer than the storm." His head dips again, exhaustion pulling him under. Clara's hand hovers near his cheek, torn between helping and retreating. She tucks the blanket tighter around him and hurries to finish her chores, her heart pounding like a war drum as she glances back at the man who's just changed everything. Back in the kitchen, her father sits at the table, smearing lard on a crust of day-old cornbread, his face etched with the hollow look of a man who's forgotten how to hope. He doesn't look up. "Feed's running low," she says, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. "Need to head to town Tuesday." He grunts, a sound as cold as the frost on the window. "I'll take the wagon." He doesn't argue. He hasn't in months. Whatever dreams he once had of protecting her from hardship burned away the day her engagement fell apart. A cattle baron's son from Helena had courted her last spring, promising a life of ease until he saw her mucking stalls one morning, her calico dress streaked with mud, her hands raw from the work. He wanted silk, not grit. Amos never spoke of it again, but the lines on his face deepened, as if her rejection had carved its own scar into his pride. That night, Clara sneaks a bowl of thin barley soup to the barn, the steam rising like a ghost in the lantern light. Elias sits up, his duster coat tight against his ribs, the blanket pulled around him like a shield. He nods his thanks, his gray eyes following her with a quiet intensity that makes her skin prickle. She notices how he moves like a man taught to shrink himself, to take up less space than he deserves. He eats slowly, savoring each spoonful as if it's the first warmth he's known in weeks. When she asks softly, what happened, he doesn't dodge, but his answer is brief. Bride changed her mind. Letter never reached her, or maybe it did. There's no bitterness in his voice, just a bone-deep weariness. Walked for a while, he adds. Thought I'd find work. Guess I found your barn. It's not mine, she says, pulling her shawl tighter. Not really. He glances around, the lantern casting shadows on his hollowed cheeks. Feels like someone's kept it breathing. She doesn't reply, just sits across from him on a hay bale, the wind rattling the barn door like a restless spirit. By the third day, Elias is splitting wood without being asked, his movements steady despite the frost clinging to his coat. He fixes the broken latch on the chicken coop, his hands red and raw but sure, his gray eyes always watching, not with hunger, but with a gentle curiosity that makes Clara's chest ache. Her father notices. Who's the fella with the lost dog eyes, he asks one morning, his tone half gruff, half curious, as he sips coffee from a dented tin mug. Just someone half frozen, Clara says, her voice calm but her heart racing. Let him stay a night or two. He's moving on soon. She glances out the window, sees Elias scrubbing the trough, his sleeves rolled up despite the cold, his forearms corded with muscle. Don't think he's got much of a plan, she adds. He's just helping. Amos grunts again, but this time it's less a protest and more a resignation, his eyes narrowing as he watches the stranger work. By the 7th day, Elias has moved from the barn to the old hired hand's cabin behind it. A drafty shack with a sagging roof, but a small stove for warmth. Clara doesn't offer, it just happens, like ice cracking under a slow thaw. He doesn't try to belong. He doesn't flirt or overstep. He stands as still as the dawn, and that's what unnerves her most. Clara has known men who saw her as a prize to win, others who scorned her for being too rough around the edges. But Elias asks for nothing. He honors silence like it's a sacred thing, noticing her without a word. One night, she catches him reading the letter again, its creases deep as scars, the lantern light painting his face in gold and shadow. He doesn't see her watching from the doorway. The wind outside has died. The stove burns low. And in that stillness, something blooms in Clara's chest. Not fear, but the ember of something new. Something warm enough to thaw the ice around her heart. She steps back, leaving him to his ghosts. But that night, as she lies in bed, she whispers his name into the dark, Elias, letting it linger on her tongue like a secret she's only just begun to understand. The days unfold in a rhythm of frost and routine. Clara wakes before dawn, feeds the horses, hauls firewood, scatters ash on the icy path between the house and the barn. The wind still howling like a beast trying to erase the world. The only new thing is Elias, quiet and steady, moving across the land like a shadow too soft to disturb the dust. He doesn't ask to stay. He doesn't beg or barter. He just rises each morning and fixes what's broken, replacing warped fence posts in the north pasture, oiling the squeaking hinges on the shed door, his hands working like he owes the land a debt. Clara watches him more than she admits, her breath catching at the sight of him splitting wood with a tenderness that shouldn't belong to such a hard task, or washing the tin plates in the trough like it's a ritual worth honoring. Every evening, she brings him whatever she can spare: a bowl of potato stew, a hunk of cornbread stolen from her father's plate. He never takes more than she offers, waiting until she sets the food down before reaching for it, as if accepting her kindness too eagerly might diminish its worth. "I'll work," he says one night, his voice a low murmur under a sky pricked with stars. "You don't owe me nothing, but I'll keep earning what I ain't got." The words make her pause, her shawl slipping from her shoulder in the cold. He doesn't smile, doesn't explain, just eats the stew like a man who knows the cost of warmth. Amos isn't blind. He sees the man working his land, sees his daughter watching, but he says little. Words are scarce for him, like bullets or salt. He just frowns deeper, shakes his head when Elias passes near the porch, and drinks his coffee in a silence that feels like a gathering storm. By the 9th day, the hired hand's cabin is swept clean. A wool blanket Clara left on the cot, claiming it was her Aunt Esther's doing, folded neatly at the foot. "She's too kind," Elias says, running his fingers over the blanket's edge, his hands rough but careful. "Always bringing things out here," Clara replies, avoiding his gaze. "They say loneliness is a wound best healed in twos." Elias nods, as if the truth in that doesn't need more words. Each night, Clara returns to the house with a flush in her cheeks that isn't just from the cold. She lingers over her chores, taking paths that lead her near the cabin just to see the lantern glow in his window. He never calls her over, never asks her to stay. But she feels his eyes on her as she turns away, like he's tracing her outline in his mind, committing her to memory without crossing a line. One morning, as the sun breaks through clouds streaked with rose and gold, Clara finds her father waiting on the porch, his sheepskin coat buttoned to his chin, his hands clasped like he's bracing for a fight. "This man," he says, his voice rough as gravel, not meeting her eyes. "What's he after he was freezing?" she says, her tone even, but her pulse quickening. "That ain't what I asked. I fed him. Let him stay." Amos turns, his face a map of wind and grief. "What are you chasing with a man like that?" "I'm not chasing," she says, her voice steady. "He's just here." Amos snorts, his breath a cloud in the cold. Men don't just show up. They come with schemes and wants. Watch what he's hiding. Clara's temper flares, a spark in her chest. Or maybe he's just tired. Pa. Like us. Amos squints at her, his gaze hard, like she's speaking a language he refuses to learn. Then he turns and stomps inside, the door slamming behind him. Clara stands there, her hands balled in her sleeves, the cold seeping into her bones. When she turns, she sees Elias by the woodpile, splitting logs with a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat, his axe never faltering through their exchange. That same day, she joins him at the smokehouse, the air thick with the scent of salt and hickory. They work in silence, passing slabs of venison to hang, their hands brushing once-twice before she speaks. "You always work this hard?" she asks, her voice softer than the wind. He shrugs, his duster coat shifting over his broad shoulders. Don't know how to stop. She doesn't smile, but her tone warms. That letter your bride never answered. He pauses, not from pain, but from thought, his gray eyes distant. No, and I don't blame her. I'm not a man of promise. A carpenter with no shop, no land, no sweet talk, just work. You came anyway, she says, her voice a quiet challenge. Felt wrong to stop. Somewhere between Ohio and here, the story stopped being about her and started being about the road. Sounds like a preacher sermon. He gives the smallest smile, a crack in his stoic mask. Maybe I'm just trying to make sense of a fool's errand. They return to their task, but the air between them shifts not heavy anymore, but lighter, like a bridge half crossed. That night, a storm crashes in without warning. A howling beast that slams branches against the roof and sets the cattle lowing in distress. Clara bolts outside, her coat flapping like a raven's wings, the wind tearing at her braid. Elias meets her halfway between the barn and the porch, a lantern swinging in his hand, its light a flickering beacon in the chaos. I'll check the east gate, he shouts over the gale. I'll get the foal, she yells back, her voice fierce with purpose. They don't hesitate. Don't argue they move like partners who've weathered a lifetime of storms. Even if this is their first. Snow stings her face, falling in blinding sheets. The wind roars down from the hills. A feral thing. Clara finds the foal in the far corner of the barn, trembling on spindly legs, its mother snorting in panic. She scoops the foal into her arms, her muscles screaming under its weight, her boots slipping on the icy floor. The wind nearly topples her as she stumbles toward the stall door, but then Elias is there, his coat soaked, his eyes wild with determination. He takes the foal from her arms without a word, his touch gentle despite the chaos, and carries it to the warm straw, setting it down like it's made of glass. Clara follows, her breath ragged, her hands shaking. He drapes a burlap sack over the foal, then turns to her, snow melting on his lashes, his face lit by the lantern's glow. You hurt, he asks, his voice low but urgent. I'm not fragile, she snaps, though her knees wobble. He reaches out, hesitant, and brushes a strand of hair from her cheek, his fingers rough but warm. No, you ain't. They stand there, the storm raging around them, their breaths mingling with the cold. She sees her reflection in his gray eyes, fierce and unbroken, and something shifts a moment that passes but leaves a mark. 2 nights later, Aunt Esther arrives, bundled in a shawl that smells of lavender and old secrets, her spectacles glinting as she peers at Clara with knowing eyes. She claims she's brought quilt scraps, but her real purpose is clear. She wants to see the stranger the snow delivered. Elias shakes her hand, his grip warm and steady, his manner respectful. Esther smirks. He's a quiet one, she mutters to Clara as he turns to stoke the stove. Quiet's trouble. Trouble how Clara asks, her voice low. Because the quiet ones hear your secrets and keep 'em. Clara doesn't reply, just watches Elias coax a flame from damp wood, his movements deliberate, his presence a steady anchor in the flickering light. That night, the homestead sleeps easier, the air softening as if the land itself feels the change. Clara lies awake, staring at the ceiling, the wind a distant hum. She thinks of Elias's hands, not how they touched her. but how they held the foal, how they mend what's broken with a care that feels sacred. He looks at her not like a man with a plan, but like a man who sees her whole strong, scarred, enough, and that, more than any promise, steals her breath. It's not that he stays, it's that he never demands to. Winter bites harder, the snow freezing into a crust that snaps like brittle bones underfoot. January strips the land bare, peeling bark from the cottonwoods and mercy from the air. Every task takes more horses stiff in the dawn chill, hinges groaning. Clara's hands blistered from hauling buckets with frozen rope handles. The cold doesn't ask, it invades, sinking into her bones like a tenant who won't leave. That week, Elias speaks little, and so does she. Words are like kindling, too precious to waste. But he's there, chopping, hauling, fixing. His presence a quiet stitch in the fabric of her days. He never crosses a boundary, but he's carving a place in her heart. His boot prints a map between the cabin and the barn. Amos notices, his silence growing sharper, a blade honed by suspicion. Each morning, he slams his mug down harder, his eyes tracking Elias from beneath his hat's brim. Clara feels the rift widening, a chasm where trust used to be. Then the fire strikes. It starts small, a spark from the lantern as Clara reaches for a harness. A careless flick in the dry air. One moment. The barn is quiet, the air thick with the scent of hay and horse. The next, flames lick up the wooden post like a serpent, hungry and swift. Clara shouts, grabbing a burlap sack to smother it, but the wind finds a gap in the wall and roars in, feeding the blaze. The fire races along the beams, leaping to the roof like a living thing. She runs not for the house, but for the cabin, her boots slipping on the ice, her voice raw. Elias. He's out the door before she reaches it, his duster thrown on haphazardly, boots unlaced, an axe gripped in his hand. He doesn't ask where he sees the glow and runs toward it, past her, into the inferno. The barn burns at two corners, smoke rolling thick as fog. Elias yanks the door open, his sleeve over his mouth, the horses bolting into the night, their eyes white with terror. Clara follows, coughing, dragging hay bales away, kicking open the back door to let the smoke escape. Only one stall remains the mare and her foal, huddled in the far corner, the flames licking closer. Elias doesn't pause. He drops the axe, vaults over the stall door, and lifts the foal, his arms steady despite the heat. The mare follows, trembling but trusting, her hooves clattering on the floor. The smoke chokes the air, the fire roaring in the rafters. Clara's voice breaks, a desperate cry. Elias. He staggers out of the haze, eyes bloodshot, hair singed, the foal clutched to his chest. He walks past her, sets the foal in the snow, and kneels beside it, his breath ragged. Clara drops to her knees next to him, her hands shaking. His hands are blistered, the left side of his coat charred black. The night howls around them. The fires glow a cruel sunrise. She touches his face, her fingers trembling. You could have died. So could you, he says, his voice rough with smoke and something deeper, something that sounds like fear, but not for himself. The words sink into her like a balm, warming the cold ache in her chest. They don't return to the house, not yet. They sit in the snow by the dying fire, watching the smoke curl into the starless sky. The barn scarred but standing. The fire took little, but it nearly took everything. At last, they moved to the cabin, their steps heavy with exhaustion. Clara fetches salve and strips of muslin, her hands steady despite the tremor in her heart. Elias sits on the cot, elbows on his knees, letting her tend to his burns. He winces only once, his jaw tight. "You're lucky," she says, her voice soft but firm. "Just burns. Feels worse than it is." She manages a small smile, fleeting as a snowflake. "You saved them. Didn't think, just acted. That's who you are. Isn't it? You just do." He looks up, his gray eyes softening, sharpening, holding her in a gaze that feels like a vow. "I do," he says, "but I've never stayed. Not once." She sits back on her heels, her shawl slipping to her elbows. Why not never had a reason to? The cabin feels smaller, the air thick with the weight of what's unsaid. The oil lamp flickers on the shelf, casting shadows that dance like ghosts. The storm outside has stilled, the silence before dawn a fragile thing. Her voice is a whisper. "What if you did?" He doesn't answer, not with words. She rises, her hands trembling, and moves to the stove, stoking the coals until they glow red. There's never been a moment like this, not with the cattle baron's son. Not with any man who's crossed her path. This isn't a proposal born of romance or letters. It's a bond forged in survival. In the sacred knowing of two souls who've faced the fire and lived. "You don't owe me anything," she says, her voice steady now. "But I need you to know something." He turns to her, his eyes searching. She holds his gaze, unflinching. "You make this place feel alive again, like it can breathe." Elias stands, slow and deliberate, his bandaged hands hanging at his sides like weights. He crosses the room in 4 strides, stopping just short of her, the heat of his presence a fire all its own. "I don't know what I'm worth," he says, his voice low. "But I know how to stay." Outside, the first light of dawn paints the horizon in gold. "I've got no family," he adds, "no land. Just these hands and what they can build." Her throat tightens. "No one's ever chosen me without wanting something in return, not because they had to, not because they saw a prize." He reaches into his coat, pulling out the letter, its edges curling with age. The words meant for a woman who never answered. He holds it out to her. "Burn it." Her fingers hesitate, then close around the paper, the parchment rough against her skin. She steps to the stove, opens the firebox, and sets the letter on the coals. It curls like a dying leaf, the edges blackening, the ink melting into nothing. When she turns, he's still there, his hands open, his eyes steady. And she says, her voice clear as a bell in the stillness, "Marry me." He blinks, the word a stone dropped in still water. Clara. Not for love, not yet. For something stronger, something that can't break in a storm. He steps closer, his shadow merging with hers in the lamplight. He doesn't question her, doesn't doubt. "I'll marry you," he says, "but only if you promise me one thing." She nods, her heart a drumbeat in her chest. "Anything. If I stay, truly stay, you'll let me be more than what this land needs. You'll let me know you, all of you." Her breath catches, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "You want me to be me, even if you don't know what that means yet." He exhales, a sound like a man stepping into sunlight after years in the dark. Then he takes her hand, his bandaged fingers rough but warm. "Then it's done," he says, as the first rays of dawn spill through the window. An hour later, Aunt Esther arrives, bundled in a quilted shawl, grumbling about the cold and men who can't wait for spring to make their vows. But when she sees their faces smudged with soot, wind-ravaged, glowing with a fire that isn't from the stove, she falls silent. They stand in a clearing by the frozen creek, the sky a wash of lavender and amber, the cottonwoods casting long, skeletal shadows on the snow. The air is still, the world holding its breath. Esther holds a weathered Bible, its leather cracked like the earth in drought. She reads the words slow and sure, her voice a steady thread in the quiet. She pronounces them husband and wife before the frost melts from their boots. Clara wears no ring. Elias speaks no vows. But their eyes lock, a promise deeper than words. And that's enough. The fire in the barn has died. The homestead sleeps. But Amos hasn't emerged. Not yet. Clara knows he's aware her boot prints in the snow told him everything. They don't wait for his blessing. She's learned that love doesn't always come with approval. Sometimes it comes in ashes and silence, in burned hands and winter's breath. After the words are spoken, Elias lowers his head, not to kiss her, but to press his forehead to hers, a moment of quiet communion, a vow sealed in stillness. They walk back to the cabin side by side, their footprints a twin path in the snow, their shadows stretching behind them like roots sinking into the earth. As they cross the yard, the door of the main house creaks open. Amos steps out, his hat pulled low, his hands buried in his coat. He says nothing, just stares at them, his gaze hard as flint. Elias stops, his jaw tight. Clara doesn't. She meets her father's eyes and nods, not a plea, not a defiance, just a truth laid bare. Amos's gaze shifts to the smokehouse, then the barn. Its timbers blackened but unbowed. His eyes settle on Elias. He doesn't draw the pistol at his hip, doesn't curse. He just says, "Boy." Elias lifts his chin. "Sir." Amos looks at Clara a moment longer, then turns and goes inside, the door closing with a soft thud. It's not much, but it's enough. That night, under a sky ablaze with stars, Clara and Elias sit on the cabin's threshold, their shoulders brushing, their hands entwined. He holds her like she's always been his, and she leans into him not from weariness, but from want. They don't speak, words have done their work. Now it's time for living to take root. She rests her head on his shoulder, listening to the wind sigh through the grass, its edge softened, as if winter has relinquished its hold for a moment. The fire burned something away, but in its embers, they forged a vow, before the dawn, with only frost and firelight as witnesses. They chose to stay. The morning after their vow tastes of iron and frost, the air heavy with a silence that feels like a held breath. Clara wakes not to joy, but to stillness, her bare hand resting on Elias's chest as he breathes slow and steady beneath the quilt. She watches the rise and fall of his breath, wondering if all marriages begin this quietly, not with fanfare, but with a deep, unshakable resolve. Elias stirs, his gray eyes blinking open, a faint smile tugging at his lips. His burned hands, wrapped in muslin and softened with salve, close gently around hers. "I dreamed we were building something," he murmurs, his voice rough with sleep. "We are," she replies, her tone soft but sure. But first, a reckoning. He sits up, wincing slightly, his gaze drifting to the cabin door. They both feel the weight of what's coming. Amos's silence, a storm of its own, sharp enough to cut when it finally breaks. As the sun gilds the hills, Amos is already out, walking the pasture fence like he does after a sleepless night, a ritual to burn off the thoughts too heavy to carry inside. Clara finds him at the southern edge of the land, where the snow thins into brittle grass and the wind has carved the earth into jagged ridges. He doesn't turn as she approaches, his sheepskin coat hunched against the cold. "I got married," she says, her voice steady. "I know," he replies, his tone flat as a frozen pond. "He didn't take anything. I gave it freely." Amos crosses his arms, his gloved hands tucked into his sleeves. "You think I care about your virtue? I think you care about keeping me under your thumb." That makes him turn, his face a storm of grief and something rawer fear. Maybe, or loss. "You think I don't know you?" he asks, his voice low and rough. "You think I don't see you? I've watched you break your back for this land. I've seen every man turn you away because you're too strong to need them. And now you marry a drifter with nothing but scars and empty promises. And I'm supposed to just nod and smile." Clara holds her ground, her throat burning with unshed tears. "You haven't smiled in years. Pie. Not since Ma died." He flinches, his breath fogging in the cold. "You think I don't love you? Is that what you think you forgot how much love can hurt?" He looks away, his jaw tight. For a long moment, neither moves. Then he speaks again, his voice softer, cracked. "You know what I see when I look at you. Your Ma, her stubborn chin, her fierce eyes. And I see the day I buried her in snow like this. You wailed in your cradle, and I held you, thinking, God took one and left me the other. And I don't know what to do with what's left." Clara's breath catches, a sharp ache in her chest. "I loved her so much," he says, his voice